Welcome back to part 2. So, in our last session, we sorted out what a borrowing cost is and which assets are even in the game. Today, we're rolling up our sleeves and getting into the numbers. We're going to break down exactly how to calculate the specific amount you need to capitalize.
All right, so that leads us to the big question for today, right? Once we know a cost is eligible, how in the world do we figure out the exact amount to tack onto the asset's value? And it turns out the answer, well, it completely depends on how you borrowed the money in the first place.
And here they are, the two main paths for our calculation. On one side, you have specific borrowings. Think of this as a loan tied directly to a single asset. And on the other side, general borrowings, which is like drawing from a big, mixed pool of funds. Let's start with the more straightforward route, shall we? All right, let's dive into path 1, the direct route. This is our game plan for handling specific borrowings. So, what is a specific borrowing? Well, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You borrowed money for one specific reason, to get a particular qualifying asset. The line between the loan and the asset is crystal clear, which, makes the accounting nice and straightforward. Now, check out how simple this is. The process is just 3 steps. First, you calculate the actual borrowing cost you had on that loan. Then, and this is a neat little trick, if you were able to invest that money temporarily before you spent it all, any income you earned gets subtracted. The result? That's the total amount you get to capitalize. Simple as that. Okay, let's make this real with a quick example. A company borrows, say, 1 million rupees to build a factory. The actual interest cost on that loan is 90,000. But before they used all the cash, they parked the idle funds and earned a cool 17,500 in investment income. So what do? We just subtract that income from the interest cost. And there you have it, 72,500 rupees. That is the precise final number, the net borrowing cost that gets added to the value of that new factory building. It's plain, it's simple. But of course, things aren't always that neat. What happens when the money isn't from one dedicated loan? Well, that brings us to path 2, the pool route. This is how we have to tackle general borrowings. And yeah, this is where the calculation gets a little more interesting. So here's the fundamental problem, right? What happens when you're funding an asset from a general pot of money, a mix of different loans, all with different interest rates? How can you possibly figure out which borrowing costs to apply? You can't. There's no direct line to trace. Well, the solution is actually quite elegant. Instead of trying to do the impossible, trace the untraceable, we create a single blended weighted average rate for the entire pool of general loans. And this magic number has a name, the capitalization rate. So let me show you how it works. You just list out all of your general borrowings. In this example, we have a 1 million loan at 18% and a 3 million loan at 16%. You work out the annual interest for each one. That's 180,000 for the first and 480,000 for the second. That gives us a total interest cost of 660,000 on total borrowings of 4 million. And then comes the easy part. You just divide that total interest cost by the total borrowings. So $660,000 divided by 4 million. And that gives us our magic number, a capitalization rate of 16.5%. Okay, now this is a really crucial point, so pay attention. Unlike the specific borrowings method where we focused on the loan, with general borrowings, our focus shifts. We look at the expenditure on the asset. You track how much you've actually spent, and then you apply our new capitalization rate, that's 16.5%, to that expenditure. So if we follow the example for that plant asset, after we apply our rate to the expenditures over the right time period, we'd end up with a total borrowing cost
of 185,625 rupees to capitalize. And that's how the pool route works.
Okay, so we've got specific and general borrowings down. But before we finish up, we need to take a quick but really important detour. Let's talk about a more complex situation: navigating foreign currency borrowings. The standard itself, IND AS 23, gives us our guiding principle here, and it uses this very specific phrase: to the extent that they are regarded as an adjustment to interest costs. Okay, so what on earth does that mean in practice?
Okay, let me put it in simple terms. It means you can't just capitalize the entire loss you might get from a currency fluctuation. You can only capitalize the portion of that loss that is basically compensating for the fact you got a lower interest rate by borrowing overseas. It's seen as a trade-off, an adjustment to your interest cost.
So the calculation has a few steps, and step one is all about figuring out the what-if cost. You have to ask yourself, what interest would I have paid if I just borrowed this money locally? So in this example, if you'd borrowed 40,000 rupees at a local rate of 12%, your interest would have been 4,800 rupees. That's our benchmark.
Okay, on to step two, calculating the actual foreign cost. And this has two parts. First, the actual interest we paid, which was only 2,000 rupees. But then you have the exchange loss. Because the currency moved, we have a loss of 10,000 rupees. So you've got two pieces to the actual cost. Now, step three is absolutely key. Here, we determine the interest saving. This is the benefit we got just by choosing the cheaper foreign loan. The local cost would have been 4,800, but our actual interest was only 2,000. So that's a saving of 2,800 rupees. And here we are at the crucial final comparison. You look at two numbers: the interest saving, which is your maximum limit, versus the actual exchange loss. Our saving was 2,800. Our loss was 10,000. The rule says you can only capitalize the lower of the two. So the potential capitalization is capped at that saving. Even though the loss was way bigger, only 2,800 can be treated as a borrowing cost. So let's put it all together. The total capitalized borrowing cost is the actual foreign interest you paid, the 2,000 rupees, plus the capitalized exchange difference, which is the lower amount, 2,800. And what does that add up to? 4,800 rupees. And if you look back, that's the exact same amount as our what-if local cost. The system basically ensures you can't capitalize more than it would have cost you to borrow at home. So to wrap it all up, understanding these different paths, the direct route for specific borrowings, the pool route for general borrowings, and this complex detour for foreign ones, that is the absolute key to accurately costing your qualifying assets under IND AS 23. But knowing how to calculate the cost is really only half the battle. Which leads us to our next huge question. When do we actually start the clock on capitalization? When do we stop it? And are there ever times when we need to hit the pause button? We're going to cover all of that in our next part. With the framework in place, we're ready to look at the numbers. Refer your textbook thoroughly. It's very important for exams. Write down some notes to make your revisions quicker, and take a small break before you go next part.